Hello and welcome to Art Masters with me, Mrs. Portilla. Today we are going to be learning about an artist for Art Masters. We're going to learn a little bit of history about this artist. We're going to see some slides of their work, and we're going to see a little glimpse of what this month's art project will be. Today we'll be learning about American sculptor Alexander Calder. And before we look at his art studio, I want to ask you a question. How many of you are nice and clean and your room is very clean? How many of you, your room is a little bit messy? What if you were an artist? Would your studio look like your room? Let's take a look at Alexander Calder's artist studio. Alexander Calder was an artist ever since he was a young boy. His first studio was a tent. Other studios were basements or other homes. Later in life, his studios were separate buildings like this one. Does this remind you of your room at home? His studio may look messy, but he knew where each thing was and could pick up just what he needed, even if it was buried in a pile of junk. He never threw anything away. He said, "You can always find new ways to use scrap metal so it isn't scrap anymore." Calder was born in 1898 to a family of famous artists. His mother was a painter, and his father and grandfather were sculptors. He became the most famous of them all. After he graduated high school, he decided to become an engineer. He went to school and earned a degree in mechanical engineering, and after having various jobs, he found that he really wanted to be an artist. So he studied at the Art Students League in New York for several years. He was an artist and an engineer at the same time. Calder liked to think up new contraptions all the time. His sister described his bedroom as a maze of strings. There were strings to pull up and lower the shades, there were strings to open and close the windows, and more strings to turn the lights on and off. As a child, he preferred to make toys rather than play with them, and he became an artist. By the time he became an artist, he had made hundreds of toys, most of them with moving parts. Later, when he decided to make his own miniature circus, he used strings to operate the curtains and to move the people and animals about. During the early part of the 20th century, the circus was very popular. Many artists used the circus as a subject for painting. Calder used it as a subject for his sculpture. In 1925, he worked as an artist for the National Police Gazette and was assigned to cover the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. Spent 2 weeks day and night watching the circus and performers. He created a full page for the newspaper. This gave him his inspiration to create his own miniature circus. "I always loved the circus, so I decided to make a circus just for fun," he said. For his circus, he kept adding new performers over a 5-year period. He ended up with a whole troupe of 55 people and animals, none of them more than 14 inches high. Best thing about his circus was that he could pack it all up into 5 suitcases and take it wherever he went. When he was in Paris, he gave circus performances to other famous artists using small sculptures like puppets. As the years went by, he would give performances to people all over the world. The performers were put together with bits of wood, metal, cloth, and paper. He could control the movement of the animals with strings. There were acrobats that could swing through the air and catch each other by their tiny claws or hands. Today, the complete circus is on display in the Whitney Museum in New York. During the time he created his circus figures, Calder made his first wire portraits of people and animals. His first book was called Animal Sketching. It contained quick pen and ink sketches of animals, but instead of drawing the animals standing still, he drew them in motion. He also used as few lines as possible. The result is a book filled with simple drawings that capture the personality of each animal. His best drawings look as if the lines are pieces of wire twisted to make the drawing. It's no wonder that he started working with wire. The pieces he created looked like 3-dimensional line drawings. In his early days, he would sometimes go to a gallery that was showing his work, carrying his shears and pliers and a roll of wire over his shoulder. Then he would create brand new wire sculptures right on the spot. He told his sister, "I think best in wire." I think he used wire instead of sketching with a pencil. If we look closely to discover more about this sculpture, we'll notice that it's somewhat abstract or not totally realistic. You'll notice how thin the horse's legs are compared to the body. He exaggerated the difference to show how fragile horses' legs really are. Even though it's not perfect in detail, we get the essence or the idea of a horse. Notice how Calder wrapped or coiled the wire around instead of welding it with heat to connect his pieces together. This keeps your eye moving throughout the sculpture. We notice that movement is very important to Calder, but not all of his sculptures moved. The ones that did move were called mobiles, and the ones that did not move were called stabile. Calder stabiles can be seen all over the world. Even though they do not move, there is a sense of movement in the designs. We'll notice those repeated curves giving us that sense of movement. Even though this is an abstract sculpture, can we guess what the subject is? Well, if we look at the title, we'll notice it says whale. Can you see a whale? You'll also notice he did not use very many colors in his sculpture. He only used black, bright red, yellow, blue, or orange. Red was his favorite color, and he usually wore a red flannel shirt to work. For a big stabile such as whale, Calder made a scale model. Sometimes his models were made of heavy paper or from his metal scraps. He would take his model to a skilled metal worker who would create the final huge metal sculpture. They would machine cut the pieces from heavy steel plates in order to make the bends and curves. The pieces would be rolled between huge rollers. Cranes were used to lift the pieces so the workers could bolt them together. So far, we have now seen a stable and a wire sculpture. Now let's look at Calder's favorite form of art, mobiles. Calder described his mobiles as poetry that dances with the joy of life and surprises. Motion was the most important thing of Calder's work. As you look at this mobile, try to imagine how it might move. Calder learned the art of motion as a young child, like racing with cars or trucks with your friends. He used to build chariots pulled by horned toads, and he would race his sister. To get the toads to race, yes, real toads, he would dangle flies in front of them for appetizing encouragement. He harnessed his matchbox chariots to the toad with threads, and they raced off. Calder became a master of movement sculpture by the time he was an adult. This is how he described creating a mobile. I start by cutting out a lot of shapes. Next, I file them and smooth them off. Then I arrange them on the table with wires between the pieces for the overall pattern. Finally, I cut some more of them with the shears, figuring the balance. You put a disc here, and then you put a disc on the other end, and then you balance them on your finger. Mobiles are Calder's most important works, and they are the form of American sculpture most admired by people all over the world. It was Marcel Duchamp, a famous French painter and friend of Calder's, who suggested the term mobile. The word mobile is used only for sculptures that move freely in the air without cranks or motors. If you look at the title of this mobile, now you might get an idea of what this abstract art is supposed to be: a lobster trap and a fish tail. We'll also notice his balance. The large shapes balance the smaller one. Like he said, he balanced this on his finger before he created it. Not all his mobiles hang from the ceiling. Can you think of another position for a mobile? Calder designed 3 kinds: hanging, standing, and those attached to the wall. This one is a standing mobile, and you'll notice it can still move. The title is Baby Spider, and it might remind you of the spider's legs. The movement can be the wires can rock back and forth or spin, and we'll notice that this is abstract art. It doesn't look like a realistic spider, just the essence of a spider. If you look closely at the shapes he used like simple triangular shapes, and they're not all exactly the same, giving this mobile a sense of harmony. In the 1950s and 1960s, his work was very popular. People all around the world wanted to have his work displayed in their museums and outdoor plazas. Calder did not wait for commissions to come to him. As soon as he thought of an idea for a mobile or a stabile, he would create it. He did not even think about the cost or worry if it would be sold. Sometimes his storage and studios would be so full, the overflow of art would have to be stored outside. Remember, his stables and standing mobiles could be very enormous in size, ranging from 25 feet or more in height and weighing as much as 25 tons. Let's look at this next slide and see if we notice a stabile. This is Calder standing next to one of his stabiles in France. He named it Ant-Eater. Do the thin pointed pieces poking into the ground remind you of an ant-eater's long tongue? He had 2 studios and homes, one in Connecticut and one in France. Him and his wife loved France very much and spent a great deal of their time in the French countryside. His French studio was immense, about 80 by 40 feet, with a peaked ceiling tall enough to hold the largest of his works. Obviously, the stabiles would not fit through the front door, so one side of the studio had a special doorway built to accept the stabiles that were constantly coming and going from the studio. Do you think he could create these giant sculptures all by himself? Nope. He would make a small scale he would make a small model, and then he would send his work to a metal factory to be finished. The factory was a very big and noisy place. This is Calder standing next to one of his stabiles at the factory in France. The factory had railroad tracks running right up to the main building. The only size limitation for the stables were that they must fit into the freight cars. Sometimes a stable that was created in France had to be delivered to a museum in the United States. So, like his mobiles, Calder designed his stabiles to be unbolted and taken apart easily for shipping. This stabile, called Guillotine for 8, was created in his studio and metal foundry in France, and then it was shipped to the Guggenheim Museum in New York for a special exhibit of Calder's work in 1964. It was a great honor for Calder to be chosen for an exhibit at the Guggenheim. The museum wanted to show examples of all of Calder's work, the drawings, the wire sculptures, the circus, the mobiles, and the giant stabiles. Calder had some of his mobiles hung low enough so that children could blow on them. The curators of the exhibit were not happy to see children playing with Calder's sculptures, but Calder was delighted to see children enjoying his work. After all, his sculptures were meant to be enjoyed. However, museums have to be very careful not to harm artwork. Therefore, they don't allow people to touch anything. Some museums even have alarms go off if someone gets too close to something. After the Guggenheim exhibit, Calder was busy just keeping up with all the orders for giant mobiles and stabiles. One of the largest stabiles Calder created was for an outdoor plaza in Chicago. This is one of the small-scale models that Calder made for it. He named this one Flamingo. The red color, the long thin legs, and is that a head tucked into its body? After it was reproduced in its full size, it looked like this. This is the finished work in the outdoor plaza of the Federal Center in Chicago. Do you think this sculpture would fit well inside a museum? Probably not. It's huge. Imagine you are in Chicago and you're walking under this stabile. As you walk, you'd see huge shapes with angles and curves that keep changing with every step you take, as if it's moving with you. You'd feel very small because it's so large. Calder is often not thought of as an engineer, but he was a brilliant mechanical engineer. In order to create a piece of sculpture this large, a whole crew of workmen with cranes was needed. He could not have designed and installed it without his background in engineering. Calder created this huge mobile for the Fourth National Bank and Trust of Wichita, Kansas. It's hard to see the size of this sculpture because of the camera angle, but we know it's very large and posed great difficulties to those in charge of hanging it inside the lobby of this building. Huge cranes had to be brought inside to work. Cables had to be hooked to the pieces as they were hoisted up. Once again, we see what a great engineer Calder had to be. While he made monumental mobiles for office buildings, he still made the smaller ones too. He had so much fun building mobiles that he even decorated his house with them. Calder built a couple of mobiles for his friend, who paid them with the old French country home instead of cash. Calder and his wife loved the old house, and they made most of the furnishings by hand. Calder enjoyed creating mobiles, wire sculptures, paintings, and rugs for the home. But that's not all he made for his home. His wife used an old wood and coal stove for baking bread in their French country home. Calder made all of the kitchen utensils and created objects for the walls as well. If his wife needed a utensil, he would create one on the spot. Look at the items displayed on the wall. Don't they make an interesting composition? His wife considered herself very lucky to be using Calder originals for everyday cooking and chores. What utensils can we identify on this next slide? Notice the graceful lines to all the pieces and the Calder coil of many of them. That characteristic coil shape was especially noticeable in the many pieces of jewelry Calder made for his wife. His wife Louisa loved wearing her husband's many creations. He loved his wife so much and adored making jewelry for her. She would display her husband's jewelry over her dresser in the bedroom instead of leaving it in the jewelry box. He never stopped making sculptures. Even in his 70s, when most people would have retired from working, Calder was still busy creating mobiles and stabiles. In 1976, the Whitney Museum in New York held another exhibit of Calder's art called Calder's Universe. It was to honor Alexander Calder for his enormous contribution to the art world. The first evening of the exhibit was celebrated with a grand opening event where friends from all over the world attended. Unfortunately, that was the last show Calder would attend. A few days later, Alexander Calder had died at the age of 78. Before his death, he had designed a model for a monumental mobile to be hung in the National Gallery. This magnificent giant sculpture hangs in the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. It dominates the lobby when you enter, and every visitor's eyes automatically looks up to watch the giant mobile move slowly around the huge glass ceiling. This was Calder's last mobile. Because he died before it was finished and installed, he never got to see how magnificent it looks in this beautiful space. And since he never liked to name his mobiles until after they were hung, this one is simply called Untitled. Calder made so many big mobiles and stables during his life that chances are good you will one day be in a big city and get to walk under one of them. In Los Angeles, there is one called Four Arches at the Security Pacific National Bank. Almost every major museum in the world has one of Calder's sculptures on display. So for our activity, we'll be making our own small-scale sculptures using paper and wire and Calder's colors of red, black, and yellow. So I hope you look forward to making your mobile just like Calder.